All right. Right, we're going to start the meeting. Roll call. Hi, David. Here. 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 Andrea, do we need to bring you in over here?
We're just making fun out of this size.
Okay. All right, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Vicki has volunteered to start it.
Come on up. Come on down.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right, up first we have public participation and recognition of DeKalb High School chess team. The DeKalb High School chess team went to their first tournament on November 17th at Freeport High School in Freeport, Illinois. There were 8 players on a team who played 8 players from an opposing team. There were 65 possible points in a round. DeKalb played 2 rounds and scored 40 to 25 the first round and 60 to 5 in the second round. They gave DeKalb the highest total points for that match. The Board of Education recognizes and congratulates Paul Caparet, Sam Clay, Bruce Henry, Chris Sheehan, Daniel Alvarez, Chris Cooper, Libby Milner, and Robbie Hansen and Micaiah Keller on their team's success. So congratulations. And how about if you give us just a little, how does the chess match team work?
Coach Haber?
Yep.
Well, the students wanted to start a team this year, so they've been meeting on Tuesdays and Fridays, and it's very student-led. They come together, they work out chess puzzles, they play each other, they think through strategies. Sometimes they play a little Jenga after, they've done the chess games and they need to decompress, but it's been a wonderful group. And I just got an email today from the head of the president of the Northern Chess League. We've completed our 6th tournament yesterday. And he wanted to just, he sent me an email saying how impressed he is with the skill, but most importantly, the sportsmanship of the DeKalb team and how professional they are in their approach to chess and how they've been able to jump right into competing as and most of them have not played competitively before. And so it's a really great start, I think, to what I hope will be a long tradition of chess at DeKalb High School.
Fantastic.
And I want to also make sure to recognize other staff. Ashley Rohde and Albert Gonzalez have been, equally, supporting the students, and we've been working together. And so I'm really glad that they actually played competitive chess, and so they were able to help me, navigate all the competitions we've done. But we have another game in 2 weeks, and we have qualified for the state chess competition, which is in Peoria.
First year, wow.
And it is the largest chess competition, I've been told, high school chess competition in the world.
Wow. Well, we have certificates for you, and the board would like to congratulate each one of you.
Yeah.
Now, if you guys want to line up over here, we take pictures with our members.
Can we get back in here somewhere? This is New York. Oh, we got yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
There we go.
Maybe you guys like angles?
Angle of an ass.
Way closer.
Yeah, that's it. Our buddies.
No, I got her now. I'm just waiting for it.
Okay, all right.
You want to shake hands, or do you want to?
I just want to know which, is Paul beating you, Mr. Gonzalez?
No comment.
There we go, there you have it.
Well,
It's all about the learning.
Yeah. It's not a competition.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much.
congratulations. Well, first year out of the chute.
There you go. Okay, next up we have public comment. Members of the board who wish to speak to the board. Members of the public who wish to speak to the board should complete a request card prior to the meeting. This section of the meeting will be reserved for comments from the public. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes. Criticism of individuals is not in order. Okay, thank you. Board committee reports and correspondence.
Curriculum Council met January 14th. Among the agenda items were an update on a pilot science program currently being run in 8th grade and in 9th grade for earth-based science and 9th grade bio. The program is digitally delivered and it has lots of support for teachers and instantaneous Spanish translation for the ELL students. It's also able to differentiate instructions and worksheets based on student Lexile scores. The program is completely changing instructional practices in these classrooms. The elementary curriculum area is working on teacher resources for differentiation that complement MyOn, and staff development is being prepared to assist teachers with MyOn, Fluency Tutor, and Khan Academy, all of which are online resources. The secondary curriculum area is trying to align 7th grade advanced algebra to 8th grade algebra because of a gap in the pre-algebra curriculum for students on that track. Access online testing continues for ELL students, and that's an online test evaluation for those students. Amy Crook's running that. And then Christy's department is starting PD for suicide protocols. The curriculum department continues to work toward getting our new science and curriculum and social studies curriculum to align to state standards. New textbooks are needed district-wide. We don't have a single textbook, science textbook in this district right now that's NGSS compliant. Is that right? It's a fair statement, right? Social studies, pretty much the same thing. Jenny has people starting to do OER research to start to build digital textbooks so that some of those needs are met as standards are implemented and rolled out. Finally, the online 5 essential survey has started, and there's a new assessment called the Illinois Science Assessment. It's NGSS evaluation, and it's coming in May for 5th grade students, 8th grade students, and high school biology, and that mandatory assessment is only delivered online. So there's a lot of online one-to-one device PD and work going on out there.
Assessments, yeah.
And that's plenty.
Technology committee met last week, but I was unable to go, so I'm going to defer it to Jenny to give an update.
So at technology meeting last week, we spent a good chunk of time talking about successes and opportunities for improvement with the curriculum tech initiative. And I'm just gonna highlight a couple of the successes and then the opportunities for improvement, but, teachers are taking risks, in terms of their instruction and trying new things. And they are doing a lot of work with the instructional coaches. And students are getting more current materials to read at home as a result of the device, but then because we are pushing Mayan out through the device and a couple of other things as well. Some opportunities for growth, continued PD and revising PD just to meet our teachers' needs. One of the things that we refer to when we started this process was the SAMR model. And we, right now, our teachers are in a substitution phase where rather than giving students, for example, a handout, they are accessing the handout online. And that is where we would assume we would be, but by the time we would be fully implemented with the Curriculum Tech Initiative, it's changing what that instruction looks like in the classroom. And one of the other comments that was made by a couple of people in attendance at the tech committee last week was that people thought that there would be a lot of classroom management issues and discipline issues as a result of the device, and they are finding that that's not the case, but probably Hapara is helping with that because it alerts teachers and administration to the fact when students are perhaps somewhere where they shouldn't be and off task. Couple of the other things we talked about is touchscreen versus non-touch in terms of differences in damage that we are seeing across the district. We also spent an awful lot of time talking about whether or not devices should be turned in at the end of the school year. And didn't come to a conclusion or wanting to check with other districts that are one-to-one and see what they have been doing. And then to finish up our meeting, we spent some time talking about the Curriculum Tech Initiative as we look ahead and coming up with some alternative plans.
Dr. Amy, can you explain SAMBR, the acronym SAMBR, with regards to the implementation technology going from substitution through like transformative learning?
So, and it's a process, and so typically you would start with that substitution, which would mean for paper and just having the student access whatever it was digitally, and then really then from, and I don't remember what each of the letters stands for, but really what we are saying is that what really is the point of the SAMR model is that students are doing their own investigating and research using that problem-solved inquiry-based learning versus that teacher-directed learning.
All right, thank you. We had our first minority recruiting committee last week. We had a really good meeting, and Jim Borman shared some information with the committee that I'd like to share with the board and everyone here. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim and he has it on the back.
What we did is we tried to find out, the first couple of things we tried to do, one was to try to find out what the pool of potential applicants are in Illinois for minority teachers, and then also to see whether somebody else was doing a good job that we could try to get to them and see what they're doing. And what was interesting was we found out that the total number of teachers in the state of Illinois is 129,000. 6.4% of the teachers in Illinois are classify themselves as Black, 5.7% Hispanic, and then 0.8% two or more races. When we ran the numbers down from that, it ends up being that we see that in the area of Black teachers, it's about 8,300. Well, then I thought, okay, city of Chicago seems to take their share of everything in the world before us. So I went and looked, and they have almost 5,000. So I started seeing what's available. We went on, and I was encouraged to look, and someone had suggested that Rockford was doing a great job of teachers. Well, 78 looks a whole lot better than our 12, but compared to their student population, it's not quite as good as ours, unfortunately. So I don't think they're where I want to. So then we started saying, okay, well, of other pockets where we would expect minority teachers to exist in decent numbers. We went to the South Cook ROE and we ran that 66 districts. We went to the West Cook ROE and ran there about 40 or so districts. And we figured out from their percentages what numbers they were. And we really came down to, when all was said and done, just going to those districts, it was 120 districts that we were able to look up their demographic information as teaching staff. That leaves about 1,200 Black teachers, 2,800 Hispanic, and those who identify themselves as 2 or more races, 475 is what's left. So when we start talking about minority recruiting, and we absolutely are committed to doing that, and we are going to do better at that. So it is a huge hurdle because of simply not having the numbers. Then out of curiosity, I went and looked up the national database. And the most current I could find there was 2012 of teachers. Black 6.8%, Hispanic 7.8%, and 2 or more 1%. And then I looked at what our teacher candidates who have been placed by us by NIU. In the last 2 years, we've had 2 that identified themselves as African American. So we have a hurdle, a huge hurdle nationally, statewide, and as a district. We have some things in mind, and we're already starting to, in our committee, identify some things that where we think we can do better and we believe we can get results. But what we did conclude though is it's not going to be easy, especially when you consider how hard it is to go from out of the state of Illinois into the state of Illinois and get the necessary credentials. It's a huge mountain. We're gonna chip away at it. We're gonna go somewhere decent up that mountain, but it's a big one. As I said, part of what I was doing is looking for somebody who's doing a great job. I haven't found that yet, so if you know somebody, let me know.
Can we be sharing this with the multicultural committee on Thursday?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
One, can we get this? Can Jim or whoever, oh, it's in front of us.
Right there.
Yeah,
You
see,
can get it.
and the print's not even that small on this one. Right, thank you. Okay, the other question was, I presume, but I'd like to know, the folks that are talked about in this sheet, in these statistics, is that all teachers? Or does it have anything to do with performance, experience, subject area? So it doesn't break it out at all by that, does it? This is all the teachers that
All
are
teachers
certified to teach, I suppose.
and have jobs.
Okay. And also, is there anything on here or anywhere else that talks about the ratio between these people and the population, you know, Black, Hispanic, mixed races, whatever?
With lots and lots of time, I could produce that.
So there isn't something already out there that
No, I've had to go to
Really?
those, like I said, today we went to my staff and I went to about over 100 districts full this day.
because that seems so obvious to me, right? I mean, how could you hope for more than whatever the general distribution of races are within the whole population?
But it
You
doesn't
could
mean,
hope for it,
but what I don't want to make sure people understand is that it doesn't mean we settle. I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting that. I think we have to work hard at it.
Yeah.
It's just like,
One more quick question, Howard, then we're gonna move on.
In the city of Chicago, you have, due to the gentrification of the south side, a number of existing schools that are being closed by Rahm Emanuel, unwisely, in my opinion. But this is potentially a source. Is there anything that we can do to tap that?
And that's something the committee can take a look at.
yeah, I think that's a very good idea. You know, make sure that we're reaching into those areas.
Okay. Next up, we have presentations. Redistricting presentation, Andrea Gorla and Matthew Crowley. Informational.
So we've been working through this process for quite a while and have been in front of you several times. So this evening, what we're going to do is put the finalized recommendations in front of you. And then in that very tiny spreadsheet that was put in front of you, there were a couple of questions by Vicki, as well as I think some other board members had also asked about, capacity of the buildings. So Tammy actually combined all of this together on one sheet of paper like I asked her. Which came out very tiny, tiny font, but, we'll focus on that later, but just so that you have, you know, in front of you, that all of this was a consideration, and we had worked, I think several times as Matthew was in front of leadership, we examined our classroom spaces. And so what Tammy did was go around again with our head custodians to do a count again of those classroom spaces, examine what those spaces are being utilized for, and then where we would look for to recapture some of those space. And as a reminder, in FFAC committee, we had presented the fact that if we had to open up another school building eventually, to accommodate the growth that was happening at the elementary level. And in doing that examination, it became quite evident that financially we couldn't support that. So that is why we were really examining what we currently have as far as classroom space. And if and when the time comes, we would start removing some of these spaces building by building when the need occurs, and recapturing some of the art room spaces or music room spaces or any of those rooms that were listed in front of us. So with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Matthew so that he can walk you through how we got to where we are and then the final recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Gorla. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Moeller, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm here, as Ms. Gorla said, to present the recommendations for elementary and middle school redistricting. And so this is a presentation that you should have, and if not, it is available online. So just a little bit about who we are. We are Proper GIS Consulting. You can go to the next slide. We are a K-12 planning firm out of Columbus, Ohio. We work with school districts all over the country. Our specialty is school redistricting, but we also do long-range enrollment forecasting and facility planning and help districts figure out things in terms of facilities and the best way to assign students to facilities. You can go to the next slide, please. So we work with districts all over the country, from 2,000 to 200,000 students. We're currently working on redistricting studies in Billings, Montana, Baltimore County, Maryland, here, of course, and several other districts on the East Coast. I am the president of the company, and I've been working in this industry for over 15 years, so I have a lot of extensive experience in technology side, but then also what works and what doesn't work as I work with different districts all over the country on things just like this. So we are here because there's a need to examine school attendance areas. There are imbalances in school utilization across the district. Several, if not all, the schools within the district are overflowing students out of their school because there's no available space at a particular grade level and things like that within the district. The district is currently overflowing over 250 students out of their home attendance area. So if a student moves in, they try to enroll at the school, say they're a third grader, there's no space for them, so they're overflowed to another building that has third grade capacity. And there's about 250 of those situations going on right now. So the district is interested in updating their boundaries so that if you live in a boundary, you have a seat there, and that you can go to your home school if at all possible. Founders receives most of the students from out of boundary. You can see Founders is a little inset map here is the small green boundary on the map. And it's a really small area. Most of the students are coming to Founders from out of boundary. And Founders has sort of evolved over time into an overflow school, and that if the school doesn't have space, they can overflow them to Founders because they have such a small neighborhood boundary. And the district is looking at trying to resolve this so that every school in the district has a zone that can assign students, can be fed by students that live inside that zone. So our project objectives are here, and every student should have a boundary that primarily serves the K-5 population. In addition to our existing bilingual classes at Cortland and Founders, bilingual classes will be offered at Little John Elementary School. In order to make room for the bilingual program at Little John, the Soul program that's located at Little John is going to be relocated to Founders Elementary School. And this is just a course of over a year. We've been evaluating programs where students live, where the schools are in the various densities of neighborhoods. And so these objectives and the decisions or the recommendations on programs and things have evolved over time to best fit the neighborhood concept. These new boundaries are expected to take into effect fall of 2016 or the beginning of 2016-17 school year. So there's a set of criteria that this leadership team and the committee worked with when we start looking at boundary lines. And these are the rules to follow when you're looking at the feasibility of moving a line one way or the other. It's good not to focus solely on one of these criteria, but to focus on all of them as a whole. And the best plan is one that touches on the criteria, but doesn't focus only on one. Because if you start to focus only on one part of the criteria, you deviate from the others. And I'll go through the criteria here. These are to balance building utilization, so trying to make sure that there's equitable use of space in your schools across the district. Minimize the impact on students, so knowing that any student could be affected in this process, trying to minimize the number of students that are moved if at all possible. Use major roads and natural boundaries whenever feasible to define attendance zones. Maximize walkability, so if students have the opportunity or have the opportunity to walk to school, we want to try to maintain that or give them that opportunity to be able to walk to school, which helps with transportation efficiency because you have more walkers, it's fewer buses that you have to have on the roads. Looking at clear feeder patterns and continuities and making sure that from the elementary to middle progression, you try not to split an elementary as it goes from elementary to middle school. Make all efforts to establish contiguous zones. So try not to have too many satellite zones, or sometimes they're referred to as islands. And in this case with the district, it has been challenging just because of the density of various communities across the district and the location of the existing schools. But this was a constant part of discussion as we were looking at options to try to adhere to this among the other criteria. To make efforts not to minimize the division of clearly identifiable community components, so apartments, residential subdivisions, and things like that. And be mindful of the impact on demographics of schools. So we were looking at race and ethnic data and also free and reduced price lunch data to see what the impact would be if a boundary plan were to be recommended. So the school administrators and myself have been meeting with the district. We've been meeting together over the past 2 years. Now, I haven't been coming into town every week or once a month, but I've been coming in. I came in last year at the beginning with looking at fresh data. We did some planning, and then I came back in last fall, and that's when we kicked back into the process, and we had some fresh data, and that brings us to where we are now. But throughout that process, we're looking at the enrollments, looking at the building utilization and capacity, and understanding traffic patterns and where the roads are and where the programs are located, trying to see if can programs be moved to help provide the relief that a school may need, and those types of questions as we were looking through it all. And then we looked through a whole series of alternatives or different options throughout the course of the last couple of years. And we had 2 draft options as of last fall or before Christmas that we presented to the public through a series of meetings. So these were the 2 options that the committee felt best met those criteria and objectives. This just gives you a feel for the timeline, just the fall 2015 timeline. You can see we had some meetings, and then we had the road shows, community information meetings, where we met with the public, invited the public out. I think it was 5 nights. Yeah. So
1 day meeting.
Yeah. And then there was also a Monday meeting that was added. So we had a lot of good public engagement and a good turnout at that. We regrouped, got back together in December after that to talk about the community's input, and that brings us to tonight where we're recommending the recommendation. And I'll walk you through a little bit about how things evolved. Okay, so these were the options that were presented to the public. We gave them large wall maps, and I recognize some of you. I think some of you came to some of the meetings to see what was being presented and what was shared. So we had a wall map just showing the current boundaries so they could use that for a reference. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see that there was an option 1, and you'll notice that there's a lot more of a dark green on the map, which is a founder's boundary that was created to provide students based on where they live. So there's enough students in the zone to populate founders. And then this was option 1, one of the 2 options. And the second option was another one that gave a little bit of a different look for the various schools in the district. So the committee was standing around these maps, and the public were looking at them, and we were helping to answer questions about the process. And also there was some statistics that accompanied the maps. We also looked at middle schools because one of the criteria is feeder pattern continuity. So we wanted to align the elementaries with the middle schools with the elementary boundary options. So these are the current boundaries. And then if you go to the next one, you can see option 1 did affect more middle school students, and I'll show you some data on that. As you can see, Malta comes into Clinton Rosette here in this particular option 1. Option 2 is it was really more. It was an adjustment that was made in town, not so much didn't affect Malta, and as option 1 did, and it did align with the elementary boundaries for the most part. So looking at the tables, there were some assumptions that were made when we were calculating numbers and looking at the data. Because of the location of programs and students attending programs from out of boundary, we wanted to make sure that we were proactive and accounted for the program effects on schools, so that we didn't fill up a school and then have them be too full to take in students for a program from out of boundary. So we looked at the October 15th data is what we were planning with in this last round. We assumed that the special program students would attend the K through 5 grade students who are not part of a special program attend school based on where they live. But for the ones with programs, we assumed that they would continue to their existing school, with the exception of Little John, because they were expanding that program. The students that attend Little John were assumed to attend Founders. And for ELL programs, we assumed the ELL programs would be offered at Jefferson, Little John, Founders, and Cortland. And so we basically kept the ELL constant, and assuming that they would go to the same school that they go to, with some exceptions and some rules. But we went through these assumptions several times just to make sure that we weren't missing kids and that we had them placed in the right spot, and so that we could be as proactive as possible. So we provided data to the public, and this is a lot of the similar data that the leadership team and the committee was looking at when we were working through it. We looked at current enrollment by grade level, and then we were looking at the estimated enrollment, and what would the estimated enrollment be if the schools, if the option were to be implemented. And you'll notice in a lot of cases in these options, the estimates are very close to what the current enrollment is, because the main thing that was driving this was giving a neighborhood boundary for Founders. And so a lot of your enrollment is managed pretty well because you're overflowing students. What we're trying to do is get you back to a neighborhood-based process that you can still maintain some similar levels of enrollment, and then provide relief to areas that need it. We looked at race and ethnic data for the options, and then for all the options, this is some similar data that we were studying to look at the impacts, the numbers enrolled. We were looking at live-in because enrolled has students coming and going currently, so the live-in kind of gave you a reference based on the population at the boundary for the people that live inside the boundary, as opposed to the overflows and things like that. And then we were looking at free reduced price lunch to look and see what the impact would be on socioeconomics. for any particular option. And then the number of students impacted were calculated, and we were counting the number of students that were affected in any particular process.
Matthew?
Yes, sir.
These two numbers, the 413 and the 358 respectively for options 1 and 2, that includes the 250 students moving back to their home schools, correct?
Yes, sir, it does. So middle school tables were in the same format, looking at the current enrollment versus estimated. And you can go to the next slide. So you had the statistics on demographics and the number of students that were impacted. And you'll see one thing to note is the middle school option, the number of students impacted. The first option impacted 191, and the second one impacted only 61 students. And that 191 was because we had moved, in option 1, we were moving Malta, changing Malta's assignment. And so option 2, it was not as much of an impact. So we met with the public. As I said, we had over several different meetings throughout November. Over 200 members showed up to this public information meetings. We had 95 total people responded to the survey. We made an online survey available for, I think it was a couple of weeks, and we had 95 total respondents to that. We answered a lot of questions and clarified a lot of things at the meetings with the 200. So I think a lot of those, the people who came to the meeting, felt like things were clarified, so they didn't respond to the survey. We had a lot of good dialogue with them actually at the meeting. And again, middle school and elementary option 2 were the ones that were predominantly favored by the people who responded to the survey. So when we regrouped, yes, that's good. So when we regrouped after the community information session, there was some specific feedback that was provided. There was an area that was moved to Founders here, as you can see it on the map, that was moved to Founders that currently is in Little John. And I think middle school option 1 had this area also changing to Huntley Middle. And the parents in this area and the families in this area had some concerns that related to the criteria, and that students in this area could walk to Clinton Rosette, and they wanted to maintain that opportunity. And also they're in close proximity to Little John, and it was a small number of elementary students, and so it was something that we could do, that the committee felt that was a good move to help adhere to the criteria, lessen the number of students impacted, and also help increase the walkability component of the plan. So with the recommendations, again, the current as a comparison, and you could go to the next slide. And this shows the recommended elementary plan, which was option 2. Option 2 was the elementary middle school plan that the committee is recommending. And you can see this is option 2 that I showed you earlier, just with the adjustment to Little John, as I had explained. And if you look at the numbers, the numbers, this shows you the current enrollment and the recommended enrollment for the various schools. So relief was made. And you see, like I said, it's the numbers in a lot of these schools are very close to what they are now, but we've migrated away from the overflow system and back to a neighborhood-based concept. So it was a successful implementation of this plan. 346 total students impacted, and the demographics here, you can see the current versus recommended impact on demographics. And then the middle school option 2 was the middle school option that made it through to the recommendation. And this is the current boundaries, and you can see if you go to the next slide, the recommendation, it was basically some alignment with the elementary boundary changes that were made that is reflected in the middle school recommendation. See the current enrollment and the recommended enrollment. So there's a little bit better of a balance in the school enrollments between the two schools. Huntley is larger than Clinton Rosette, but they still needed some relief, and Clinton Rosette could take a few more students. And then the demographic data for the middle schools, the race and ethnic, and the free and reduced price
in. So when we made that change to Little John, that ended up giving us some more students at Clint Rosette.
It was, that adjustment was only needed to be made in middle school option 1 with a recommendation. So middle school option 1 had that area zoned out of Clinton Rosette. Middle school option 2 already had that in Clinton Rosette, so there wasn't a need to make a middle school adjustment because it was already in Clinton Rosette in the recommended option. So I think that's all I have for the presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
This is helpful, but when I was reading it, one of the questions I had was, what does this do for, is there parity among class sizes with this in the different schools?
Oh, yeah, the class sizes will still be adhered to what we have. Now, what was reminded to us is as we transition that first year, it will be very important for us to try and, before we pull the trigger so quickly as to perhaps open up another classroom space or start overflowing, is to keep the students at the school they're supposed to be going at and let the dust settle. And then, take a look at by the second week of school or whatever, that the students are actually settled and here kind of stay. Because we do see movement happening, and as Mr. Cropper had suggested, the problem is when we have two immediately, we get into that overflow cycle of which we're trying to bring students there. So the sensitivity of, at first when school opens, well, there might be 1 or 2 children, or in my classroom, like we said, I think we just need to make certain the dust settles and all the kids are actually here to stay, because oftentimes they may start and then by the second week, mom and dad are moving and going out and the classroom size does shift. And we have been watchful as that actually has happened.
Yeah, kind of, you're getting into the area where I'm interested, Andrea, because, for instance, Founders became the way that it was as a result of the old Malta High School being used as a choice school. And then when it was taken over because the old Malta Elementary was shut down, so it now became an elementary school in place of the old elementary, then those kids, some of them at least, ended up at Founders in the beginning at least, so considered a choice.
Yeah, right. Actually, what we did was, because there was so much transitioning happening when we passed that referendum and the new schools were being opened, that we made a promise to people that if you started school there, you can move over to Founders and finish up. And so we have allowed that 5 years between when we passed the referendum to where we're now looking at creating these boundaries to happen, so that we did allow all those students who had started from kindergarten, not in between, but from kindergarten, if you started there, that you moved to first grade and would now be finished at Founders.
And younger siblings too.
And yes, and incorporated their siblings. But now comes the time, as we've said, and we know this is uncomfortable at any time, that you just have to make the decision to, here are the set criteria, as we stated, and kind of live through some of those war wounds for a while from folks, and eventually get settled in.
So I take that as an example of how things change, and I wonder with our expert demographer and redistricting person here, looking forward, when we build out the subdivisions on the northwest side of town, and perhaps again in Malta, if that gets up and going someday, and even in Cortland, it's hardly built out over there either. How long will it be before we're looking at this all over again? And I'm just kind of curious, in your experience, how frequent do you have to redistrict in a district of this type and size?
Usually, they can hold for 10 years. I would say, 10 years is really a good target number for an area that's not undergoing explosive growth. I wouldn't say this area is going through a lot of growth. Looking at the forecast, the enrollment forecasts that are out right now, I think that these are gonna hold you for a good while. Now, I do know of future development potential in some of these areas with some staggering numbers of units, large numbers of units. And if those come online, then you're gonna have to just examine the impact on that. The former demographic study gives a forecast by school based on the old boundaries. This is a new set of boundaries coming in line. So it'd probably be a good idea down the road before maybe next fall sometime, take a look at your demographic forecasts and get some things that are aligned with the new boundaries. So you could see that and see where you are and where you may need to make adjustments down the road.
I'm just hoping that we can be more planned rather than reactive, going forward. I mean, you learn things when you go through this process. And right now, for instance, downtown, they're talking about what sort of development might happen along Pearl Street and that whole area. Obviously, as I said, we've got the northwest side of town and the other two towns to worry about, and any number of other things that could change what everything has to look like.
Howard, do you have a question?
One of the things that you mentioned was walkability, and as you increase walkability, you overall might expect that the number of long bus rides for students within the district should decrease. Have you anticipated that, and do you see any extent to which you can say that that's likely to happen under the recommended plan?
Well, it's tough because the long bus rides are mostly for rural students that live in the outskirts. And those students don't really there's not a walkable situation for them. So I think you're still going to have some of those rural bus routes that are long. But as this committee was looking through things and looking at different options, there were some options that did take walkers and that would have to get transportation across major roads and things like that. But the recommendation does maximize the walkability around the schools as much as possible. I don't have any data that says you're going to save X number of buses for this plan versus what you have right now. But I do think that with the level of overflows that you're doing right now, there are overflows eligible for transportation. So that alone right there is going to provide some efficiencies in that a bus can do is what it standard normally does is go into an area, pick up students at a stop, fill that bus and get them to school. Right now, the overflows, you could have a speckling of students all across the district where the bus has to go pick them up. So I guarantee you're driving a lot more miles right now than what you would with a neighborhood-based system.
Yeah, and we did discuss that, and it is difficult to plot all that out, as we have our folks here from transportation. So it was, as soon as we get settled on this gets handed over to first student, and we're also going and transitioning with our routing software and upgrading that. So the minute we would know that these things are voted on and it's a go, it gets handed over to them so that they can start that routing process.
So the recommendation then from the administration is option 2 for the elementary and option 2 for middle school?
With the revision, so don't look at an option 2 map because there wasn't an adjustment to the elementary.
With those 12 students.
Those 12 in the Little John area.
Do we
And
have,
we know that, I'm sorry, we know that some families did come forward and make a plea for some changes. And in discussion, the ones that we did see, as we said, for the Little John area made sense. But as far as, for the continuity of this is the school that my child started at and all of the such, every single one of these children that we are affecting could make that statement. So the hard part is being consistent and saying for everyone, we created these boundaries and this is a plan, and while we hear your concerns, all of our principals and administration and teachers, I think, are professional enough to know that as those students have to transition, then we will make that as easy as possible.
so do we have a consensus then to bring back option 2 for elementary and option 2 for middle school? Okay, as an action. Okay, everybody's agreement with that, or?
Is there a way that we could bring it back as an action item without necessarily making it an action item for the next meeting, just to allow additional public comment time? Because we're really laying it out and saying, this is what we want to go with. We need to allow an opportunity for that to percolate through the community.
Well, I guess, we've had the public forums. Andrea talked about this at our December meeting with the recommendations that the administration wanted. And so, I guess also there's the planning time that we really have to stick to this timeline to allow her staff to be able to start the planning and
We start scheduling students in March.
I would just ask whether or not people that did come forward with concerns and asked for special dispensation, some sort of change, have they been made aware of what this final recommendation is? Or is it up to them to figure out, what the recommendation is? That kind of
This is
speaks
public
to.
information.
Well, sure, they could be here tonight, right?
Right,
yeah. But
we made it very clear as to what the timelines were, so these are the meetings that people should have come to speak, knowing that you are going to take action at the next. So with your concern, Howard, the item is on there for action, because you can't not put it on for action and then take a vote on it. Folks still can come at the beginning of the meeting, provide whatever concerns they have to you, and then at that meeting, it's listed as an action item. You either vote for it or not for it. But so that you are all aware of the sensitivity of the time frame, because we start registration and we need to get this over to transportation so that they can start routing home.
And in all the community forums, we also made them aware of the timeline and when it would be brought forward for information and possible action.
and where the information was on the website. So it's been out there since November, early November.
Yes, ma'am, and it was even made in multiple languages. We made the whole presentation format in Spanish. Yes.
So were there any objections made based on the criteria that you set, aside from the Elwood House area? I think that was the main one I was aware of. And were there any others that were criteria based in terms of an objection or asking for a change?
I mean, there were.
The one across from 4th Street, South 4th, how we put that back into that was one area.
That was yes, there was as I mentioned earlier, there was some objections to the option 1 that was not recommended, had an area that was in the founder's zone that we had zoned to Lincoln. And it was an area that it was in the small existing founder zone that kids could walk to founders. And we heard a lot from that community that don't move us because we can walk, and we would have to cross busy, I think it's Main Street.
Oh, 4th
Street, cross 4th Street. And so that was really, so the feedback helped guide the recommendation.
So Carrie, at the meeting in November, after all community forums, we changed that option to reflect that need because it was based on criteria.
Okay. So then there were two major, if you call it major changes made, the Elwood House and then this one on South 4th Street.
The one on South 4th Street was incorporated in the option,
In option two.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
So
okay.
so then that's
Which ultimately is what was recommended.
right. So they said, well,
Yeah.
let's not go with option
Yeah.
1 because it has some other criteria that are being violated.
Overall, I'm really impressed. It's an awful lot of data to look at and moving targets. And in the end, it looks like you've come up with a suggestion or a recommendation here that fits quite well. You can't please everybody all the time, I suppose, but it looks to me like the ones that had valid objections or concerns were listened to and changes were made, or else the second option in case elementary was chosen rather than the first. So overall, it's pretty good.
And please know, we did field a lot of individual, my child's been your kindergarten before, please can they stay? And we just can't make those type of exceptions.
Okay, so again, we're gonna go with the recommendation from administration to bring back next time for an action items, elementary 2 and middle school option 2. So do we have a consensus then?
Yes.
Yes. All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next we have, DeKalb District 428 Assessment Update, Park and Math, Dr. Amy Luckner, and this is an informational item.
Thank you. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Amy Luckner, and I'm the coordinator of assessment, research, and MTSS for the district. And my goal today really is to provide kind of a brief overview of our park data and our math data this year. The park results were publicly released on December 11th, and so we want to take this opportunity to make sure that everyone was aware of them and also provide a little bit more information about our park data. And then I'll get into our map data as well. So as most of you know, I think park's a pretty common word around here. Park is our new state assessment. It took over from ISAT, and last year was the first time that we took the park exam along with a handful of other states. It was 3rd through 8th grade students who took the park test, as well as high school students in Algebra 2 and Humanities 3. The park assessment has received a lot of media attention, so you may have heard some different things about it, but one of the goals of the park assessment really is to align with the Common Core state standards. And so it is perceived as being kind of more rigorous, more focused on critical thinking skills and problem solving, rather than kind of more factual based. So again, these scores are from the spring, from last year. So when you see the grades, it's from students who were in that grade last year. So this is just the overall composite scores that we have. What I wanted to share with you is both kind of our scores, of course, and then we have two comparisons here. One is the state average. So for the state of Illinois, what is the average percents in each of the categories? And then I also created some peer districts. So these are districts that are matched in terms of the size as well as the percent of low income. So there's 6 different districts in that kind of peer district group. Excuse me. And they are also unit districts like we are, so K-12 districts. So that gives us a sense about people who are most similar to us. How are they doing, or how are we doing relative to that? So just to kind of walk you through this a little bit, this is similar to ISAT, where they have kind of a proficiency score. What percent proficiency is it's the combination of percent met and percent exceeded. So those together, as long as if you're at percent met or percent exceeded, it's considered to be a proficient score that you are ready for college and career, which is kind of the park goal. So the scores can fall then into those 5 different categories, all the way from did not meet up to exceeded, and those are our percents. So when we look at kind of percent proficiency, those top 2 categories put together, our overall percent proficiency for all of our grades together, this is just a big picture of our district, is 25% of our students as proficient. That's compared to 33% at the state level and 22.9% for our peer districts. The park has 2 main components, the ELA test and then the math test as well. So for ELA, this is again a very similar breakdown. And we see here that our percent proficient for our English language arts skills, if I can read that number, is 28.8, whereas the state average is 37.7, but we are a little higher than our peer districts that are 26.7. Then here are the math scores overall for everyone. Math is a little bit lower than the ELA scores. So we see here that our percent proficient is 21.2%. The state is at 28.2%. And then relative to our peer districts are 18.9%. We also have breakdowns by grade. For the grade breakdowns, we just have district and then the state comparison. And so this is kind of a way that we can see overall how our students are doing in the individual grades. Again, students that were in this grade last year relative to the state standards. And then we have math by grade as well. Now remember in the high school grade that it's by course. And so for the high school map, this is the Algebra 2 students. And then for ELA, it was Humanities 3. Typically, it's our juniors that are taking Algebra 2, but it could include some sophomores and some seniors as well. So that's our breakdown for math in terms of our number of percent of students who are considered to be proficient in their skills. So it's a kind of brief glimpse of the park data, and we can come back to that with questions as well. The other big assessment that's going on in our district is MAP, which is the Measures of Academic Progress. And as many of you know, the district elected last year to bring on MAP as a way of having kind of a more local assessment to really see our students' progress across time. And MAP has a couple of differences from a state assessment. One is that it does provide us information 3 times a year, so we can look at student growth across time. That gives us some more immediate feedback about our students that will allow us to make changes in instruction. So it's really geared to be an instructional tool that can then inform what we do in the classroom to help support our students and their growth across time. It's an adaptive test, which means that when students are taking the test, as they get answers right, they get a more challenging question, and as they get answers incorrect, they get a less challenging question. And the purpose of that is it really allows the test to hone in on an instructional level. It also has the side benefit of making the testing process a little more friendly to students, especially students who might be below grade level, because most of the questions are at their level. It feels different to students though, because it's also the case that because it's adaptive, that it's expected that you're going to get about half the questions wrong, because it's trying to find that ultimate instructional level for each student. And so we've been working on kind of educating our students about that, because especially some of our high achieving students, that's a very different feeling to be in a testing situation where you're expected that this purpose of the test is to challenge you, and you're expected to get some wrong. So we have been doing the reading and math assessments this year in our 2nd and through 8th grade, as well as, again, in high school, we do it course-based. So for our high school students, those students who are taking Algebra, Geometry, Humanities 1, and Humanities 2 have been taking the math assessments. That's primarily our 9th and 10th graders. Now, math scores are presented as RIT scores. What a RIT score is a measurement scale that allows us to quantify students' achievement in a certain area. So not to get too much into kind of measurement theory, but what it really does is it kind of provides a yardstick for achievement. So the nice thing about a yardstick is it's equal interval, and your score doesn't change based on your age. It's not 100% correct. Like if I'm this height now and I'm this height later, no matter how much time has passed, I know that I've had a certain amount of growth. So the growth is independent of kind of what grade level you're at or what age you are. But what's most important is to see it in a certain context, because it's still, what does it mean to be at a certain level? Or what does it mean to be at a certain RIT score? So here's a little bit of context here, is that students typically in 3rd grade are at about 180 to 200, and then they progress, and by high school they're usually at about 220 to 260 in this scale. But what I find to be kind of most useful is to see it relative to kind of how other students in that grade are doing across the United States. What we have here are our scores from our winter map. Again, map is done 3 times a year, and so this was in December. We had our mid-year assessment, and here's how we did overall, kind of at a district level. And what you can see is that the more reddish bar is our average score for that grade level, and then the more orangey bar is the average from a very large national sample. So it's a really kind of typically how kids are doing in that grade across the United States. And so you can see that there kind of varies by grades, but we have some great data there. Some grades are really kind of surpassing the averages that we would expect them to be at, which is exciting to see. These are the reading scores from the winter. And these are our scores from math from the winter assessment. And again, you can kind of see some patterns. It's also easy to see how this is kind of a yardstick, because you can see how the averages go up by grade. One thing that will really be helpful for us is that as we move forward as a district, we'll be able to build our own history of norms, of what is typical for our district, and so that we can really say, how are we doing relative to how we should be doing. A lot of districts have been using this for over 20 years, and so they have a really good kind of sense of kind of their district norms. And right now, we're still establishing that, so our best comparison really is kind of this national comparison. So now that we have had two time points, we've had our fall data, which was in September, and then our December data, we can also start looking at growth, which is one of the exciting pieces. Because ultimately, no matter where kids start, our goal is for them to grow across time. The orange triangle is the projected growth for that grade level, and then the bar is the actual measured growth that each grade level achieves. I want to put a quick caveat out there that our first grade data is from a pilot that we're just doing in 2 classrooms, and so that data is not representative of all first grades. So there you can see some growth data. It is true that we expect less growth as kids get older because their skills are growing more slowly. These are the data for math. And then here are the growth data for reading as well. So ultimately, what's important about assessment data, especially at the district and state level, is what do we do with it? Right? We spend time getting this information. Reports come back to us, and it is a good indicator in terms of program evaluation. How are we doing? But what's most important is then what do we do next so that we can continue to improve our students' learning so that we will then, of course, see that outcome in the assessments. There are a number of curriculum initiatives that are going on and have been going on for a while that are focused on the same types of skills that are being assessed in these assessments. And so we've been working on improving Tier 1 instruction through our data teaming process where we look at our data and then make Tier 1 changes as needed. Tier 1 is another word for our classroom instruction. So really focusing on improving our classroom instruction. We've been building in more collaboration time across these past couple years to help that process. We've been really focusing the professional development on improving those teaching strategies. So now if I know that my students are really struggling in this one area of math, what do I do? So really building that toolbox so that teachers have more resources to address the concerns that the data are showing them. And then we've had a number of great curriculum groups of teachers who have been working on continuing to align the curriculum with our current state standards. And throughout this process, we've also been able, I think, through the curriculum technology initiative, to provide more support with our instructional coaches. So we've seen that really at multiple levels here with our initiatives, but especially with some of the embedded professional development that's occurring. So really seeing how having kind of an expert there can allow individuals to build their teaching strategies kind of on a daily basis, which has been neat to see. The other piece that we do is that we continue to evaluate our progress to see if our initiatives are working or do we need to make change. So the 2 assessments that will be coming up, we will have our 3rd math, our spring assessment in April, and then Park is coming up again as well at the end of April, beginning of May. There are some changes to Park this year. I'm not sure if you guys have been aware of that, but instead of having 2 windows of tests like they did last year, it's all 1 window. And they've reduced the number of units as well to hopefully reduce some of that testing time for our students. That was a lot of information. I was really hoping to kind of just provide a big picture glimpse of the data, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. I will, of course, be back in the spring to provide kind of more detailed across the year what our math data look like as well. Yeah.
In the Park test, at the high school level, in the language arts sciences area, our students are taking humanities. And that's the criterion of they're going to take the Park test. Is that the same throughout the state? Because I don't know of all that many programs that are even called humanities.
The way that Park has it set up, or the state has it set up right now, is you can do a level 1, level 2, or level 3 at the high school. And then they have
coordinated which classes that counts for. And so for us, we've done level 3, which is typically your junior classes. And so our main junior ELA classes are the humanities 3 and the algebra 2.
And at this point, isn't the humanities class an elective?
I don't
So
believe
that
so.
It's a graduation requirement. Humanities, we call it humanities, but it's our English ELA class. It meets that English requirement.
It's a mandatory.
Yeah.
So it is getting the entire student body.
Well, at that particular level.
Oh, at that level,
Right.
yes.
And Howard, even though we call humanities versus English, like English 3 or junior English, the state has codes, numerical codes that are assigned to courses.
Mhm.
So our humanities would be aligned with
It articulates
English,
something
yes.
else,
Yeah, they have the same state code because they recognize that some people vary in the titles of the courses, but it's based on the content of the courses.
So that it's equivalent, so that
It's equivalent, yes.
you know, that the level, anyone who's electing to do level 3, that those courses match what students in another district are taking, who are taking that level of work.
A math question, just very quickly, because I know we got a lot of stuff to do, but, when we first talked about math, there was a lot of discussion about how the data would be going back to the classroom teacher and they would be able to adjust individual instruction. So what I'm wondering is how the teaching staff is responding to getting that information, and are people feeling like this is valuable, and how is that kind of going?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I can kind of answer from what I've seen, but it might be great to have some teachers here as well next time. But generally, the people are very excited to have the information. What we found is that in some of the data teams that I've visited, that there is kind of a renewed interest in really looking at the tier 1 or classroom level instruction, because they're finding that this provides them information about what to do. There's a part of MAP that you have the basic reports, but then it leads you to something called a learning continuum. And what that does is it breaks down the scores, and it says if your students are at a certain RIT score, here's what they've learned, and here's what they're ready to learn next. And it's by the standards.
Oh, good.
So you can really see that.
All right.
And if ever there was an interest to go through that, I'd be happy to do that when we have more time, so that you can see it. It's a pretty useful tool. And I think a lot of teachers are really excited. There are a number of teachers that I've seen that are jumping in, and even without support are kind of moving forward. A number of them have used this in other districts, and so they've had some experience. There's some teachers who we've been providing some training in terms of getting them up and running as well.
Okay.
So it's been pretty exciting, actually.
All right, thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
I had a question about the RIT score for math on the winter mathematics slide. So it drops off in grade 10. You know, it's a gentle and slow rise until you get to that point. And does that have anything to do with algebra A, B? And does the RIT score include up through algebra, or does it go beyond algebra?
It just includes up through algebra 1. So it's our algebra and geometry. Well, it includes geometry. It's algebra and geometry classes. So that's a really good question. And I think part of what we'll be looking for are the patterns that we see over time. I know a number of our principals have also been looking at the data to investigate questions like that. Like, is this, for program evaluation purposes, is this working? What are we seeing here as well? It is true that we do expect less growth when we get to the top there, but you can see that even relative to kind of the national growth, we are a little bit lower in 9th and 10th grade. We do see that drop off. So it also helps us to figure out, you know, where do we need to put our resources and efforts to continue building those programs. It's also the case that I think part of when we have big assessments, not big assessments, but we also, there's a little bit of a lag in time between a start of a program and then when we start seeing the results in an assessment, because these students are still students that have gone through 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So I'm hoping that we'll continue to see some improvement in our next.
That's why I'm curious about algebra AB, because we've had other data that show that it proves that the rate of children that move on, you know, from algebra as a result of AB, of delivering it that way. And yet, when I see this, that would argue against that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two conflicting data points.
Well, it would be interesting. It sounds like, you know, to break it down a little bit, because this is kind of an average across all 10th graders. or ninth graders to break it down and look kind of at those different, who is actually in algebra A and B and C.
Okay, yeah,
see
so this
that.
would include not only AV, but also the one-year algebra.
Do you, do you have the ability to disaggregate by AB versus?
You can, it does require a little bit of,
Okay.
rostering work, but we definitely could look at that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think it would, especially given our interest.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
Thanks. Next, we have the non-business consent agenda, that the Board of Education approve the non-business consent agenda items A through I. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Discussion? Roll please.
Vicky, are you in favor?
Yes.
Mary Beth? Yes. Carrie Millette?
Yes.
Victoria Newport?
Yes.
Howard Feldman?
Yes.
Next up is business consent agenda, that the Board of Education approve the business consent agenda items A through D. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Within the payroll, there is a number of things that are going on with this, but I'm concerned about the payment of differentials. And I understand that we do it in order to get people who are currently teaching to do things like take on coaching and things along that line. But where I'm looking at it, I'm wondering, how are they chosen? Maybe this is not the point to raise this as an issue, but who gets them and why? And what's the criteria of selection for it? Mostly I'm concerned because of a letter that was circulated to the board indicating one particular coach that a parent has said is probably not a wise choice for the replacement of an existing coach. And I'd like to just sort of find out why are we necessarily, two things about it. How do we choose them? And two, when we do pay a differential, are we paying pensions and various other benefits on top of that as if it was salary?
I can interview, the jobs are posted, just like teaching positions are posted. There's a date by which people can apply, and if there's more than one candidate, sometimes it's hard to find coaches. So, but if there are multiple applicants, then there's an interview process itself. So similar to hiring teachers, there's the jobs posted, people can apply, and then there's interviews. And it's usually the athletic director has the ultimate say as to who they would recommend to the board to be hired.
In matters of coaching, but then if you move to
When you talk about Tanner club differentials, quite often, it would be enviable to say we get a lot of people applying that can actually have an interview process, but the reality is sometimes we really struggle to even fill those positions.
What if we have multiples we do it?
And as far as Jim could probably address the payroll issue.
Yes, there is pension paid on top of all of that.
Okay, so that somebody gets a differential and they get a pension thing on their differential. Thank you.
Because that's included as regular income. So, yeah, so taxes are paid on it, pensions accrued out of TRS.
That's gotta be a first. I mean, people do all kinds of things, jump through hoops to get those last few years so the pension's bumped, right? But no one wants to apply for club sponsorship, and even though it would then apparently bump their pension a little bit.
And we do have a caveat in the contract, so that they can't purposefully do that in those last 4 years, when they retire.
Any other discussion?
Interesting.
Roll call please.
Mary Beth?
Yes.
Carrie Millette?
Yes.
Victoria Newport?
Yes.
Howard Feldman?
Yes.
Vicky, are you in favor?
Yes.
Next is business and finance, approval of supplemental deficiency tax levy. And this is an action item, that the Board of Education adopt and approve the supplemental tax levy for the 2015 tax year as presented. Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on this? Okay, roll call.
Karen Moore,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Vicky Hunter-Favor,
Yes.
Mary Hess.
Yes.
Next is approval of the fiscal year 2016-2017 budget calendar, and this is an action item, that the Board of Education approve the attached budget calendar for fiscal year 2016-2017. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on this? Roll call, please.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Karen Hunter-Favor,
Yes.
Mary Hess,
Yes.
Karen Moore,
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes. Okay, next is course fees, and this is Andrea, and this is an informational item.
So annually, we do take a look at how much we are charging families for certain. So in front of you this evening is not registration, but these are fees that perhaps were selected amount of courses. That there may be an increase on your proposed, or for a fee, and I believe it was limited to the middle school that had never been on our books, that we're looking at putting on, and they supplied the rationale as to why they would like to consider incorporating those fees. If there's any questions, I think Tamara for the high school could speak to those.
Yeah, generally speaking, can you put any kind of a percentage on the fees as to what part of cost they actually recover? Is it different for every case, or could you do a blanket statement and say, yeah, fees recover, X percent of the cost of providing that particular activity?
Well, I don't, because it's to replenish supplies, really, right? So when the course fee is examined, it's typically, at least from what I've seen from the rationale, it's because we need more workbooks or supplementary materials or a piece of
A
equipment.
lot of the increase has been the cost of the materials that they're purchasing, like the workbooks for the Spanish class, or the music for the various bands, like the jazz band, or the music is costing more money than it costs. So it's really the cost that, the rising cost to us, we're passing on as a fee to the student.
Are we doing the zero every year, or does it just get a percentage bump according to that COLA or something to that effect?
No, it's actually, well, yeah, I believe they go out and they take a look at what those materials cost. And that's what they're saying, if there's a $15 increase per student to buy this material, that's how much is being embedded. But correct me if I'm wrong.
So there's, yeah, we don't say 5% a year going forward.
Right.
It's based on actual cost.
So it's looking at real cost
Yeah,
each year.
and sometimes we go years without increasing costs, and then,
So you don't just say, well, it was $50 last year, let's make it 55 this year.
No, for our
You look at
classes,
real cost
you
each
look at what it costs to purchase clay and so
Yeah.
forth, so, yeah.
Okay.
For these types.
I was gonna say, and unfortunately, there's been times where the cost has gone up and it wasn't recognized right away, so
Okay.
it didn't get
There
passed
could
on
be
to
a
the
lag
student.
then.
Yeah.
Are there any offsets in place for fees for those students who have a hard time trying to afford the opportunity to take art and music and things along that line? So scholarship and various other.
Well, first of all, students that are on free or reduced price lunch don't pay the fees.
Or they pay reduced.
Or they pay reduced fees, yes, if they're on reduced lunch. And we actually, the high school in particular has a fund called, it's a student academic aid fund that was set up by a family in the community for that specific purpose, to help cover the costs of either courses, or if a student wants to take an SAT, or maybe a CTE class, or a class out of Kishwaukee College. There's a family in the community that's given us significant funding and then set parameters around what that money can be used for. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
And even those families who do pay, if there is a struggle, we work with them on making for all the fees that are owed to them.
Once the specific, AP Spanish 5, $125. That's like through the roof compared to everything except driver's ed. What's the deal there? Why are workbooks there so much more expensive than whatever other materials costs are shown here? Anybody know?
And are we catching up after multiple years?
Yeah, it's the cost of the exam,
Well, they pay, what then they pay.
but it's the cost of the materials that College Board says you must provide. You don't have a choice. It's what we have to provide.
So this is a college fee. It's the last
This is where
class
they
in
get the college credit
sequence.
when they take the AP exam.
Okay, okay. Interesting though that it's that much more.
Yes.
And we have no choice with that. If we offer the class, we have to
Yeah.
follow the College Board's materials.
Do we have a consensus then to bring this back?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Okay, new business and administration, relocation of the transition 18 to 21-year-old program. Christy Meyer, and this is an action item that the Board of Education approved to relocate our transitional program to the KEC campus with the possibility of managing a multi-district program in the 2017-18 school year. Do you have a motion?
Second.
All right, discussion?
Questions? So Christy, I know you went out and you talked to people at KEC and other people involved, if this happens, would be doing some part of it, right? So what was the result from those kinds of discussions?
Well, first of all, to get some information, Tammy Carson and I, and also Wendy Bono, who would coordinate the program, we went out and we did some cost analysis, as you see up there, of what it would cost, because what the superintendents wanted to know was the bottom line about cost of the program. Okay, so we needed to flesh that out. So we did that, and if you want to, that's how much it would cost for the general remodeling of the area, and then some of the equipment costs and the furniture costs. So the total relocation cost would be what you see there, $4,920. And what then we did, if you want to go to the next page, is I took a look at also what kind of savings would we have. And so right now, I took a look at the transition program that we have, and the assistant to student ratio is 1 to 2. So that totals the $162,000 per 10 students. With the proposed program, we would have our student ratio would decrease to 1 to 3 because of the location of the program and how our vocational opportunities are right there on campus. So we wouldn't need one student going off to, let's say, Schnucks with an assistant, or 2 students with an assistant. We could better assist students within a smaller area on the campus. So our ratio could go up, and so that would be a total of $108,000 per 10 students. So we would have a savings there of $55,000 plus. And then also we would have a savings in transportation, because currently right now we transport to all of our vocational locations. And in this case, our vocational opportunities will be on campus in walkable distance. So that transportation cost and I would be a substantial cost. I was not able to secure the exact amount there. Thank you, Cindy. One more thing. So then folks ask, well, how are you going to fund this? And so time is of the essence, and so I will be, upon approval of this board and KEC, I would need to start right away with working with the DeKalb County Community Foundation. They have a community needs grant that would be due March 1st, and I would find out by May 1st. If we secured that, there are the other funding sources as well. And lastly, so you asked about KEC. I've talked to the superintendents. They did have quite a few questions. One in particular was in regards from our ROE. She questioned
putting the program out there. And because of some legislation regarding the Safe School, and the Safe School is located in the same building, my response to that was that if you are familiar with the KEC building, we have on one side is the Safe School and our school for students who are chronically truant, and then on the other side is the VOTEC, and at the far end would be this classroom, okay, and we would have a separate entrance and exit. So there have not been problems between those two sides to this point, but that is a concern of the ROE. Otherwise, we're hoping that we can get over some of those obstacles, one being the RSSP program or the Safe School concern. Another is the cost to other districts to transition to have their students come to this program. What I think, what I am hearing is the question of why do we need it out there? And what I'd like the message to be is that this is another opportunity, another choice on a continuum of services for our 18 to 21-year-old students. It's because right now in our county, there are, let's say, Sycamore, who has it attached to Opportunity House, which is a workshop setting. This is another type of setting that families and students could choose in our county. And I feel as though we need a more of a continuum of services available in our county. And right now, we're limited. We, in District 428, are very limited because we have it at our high school. So those are some of the issues, I'm being honest, that KEC is concerned about. They're also wondering down the line if they need that space. And right now, for the most part, it's being used as storage. It is being used for mass communication, but a very small portion of that space.
If the board were to approve this, then it would still have to go to the KEC governing board for, well, see if they're okay with it.
One of the concerns I have, and you, thank you very much for bringing up the ROE's point of view on this. In the very beginning of the presentation, there's a slide that talks about, in best practice, you would take it out of the high school and put it here. It would be better.
You'd put it somewhere other than
in the high school. Okay. And then there's the talk about shadowing or some sort of job on campus at Kishwaukee or KEC. Yes. And that seems to me to be in opposition to the first thing, right? So you move it away from the high school in order that these now adults can have the experience of not being in that high school, but rather in some other more elevated, if you will, setting.
Adult.
A more adult setting, right? But then, rather than have them go out to a workplace like a Schnucks University, we instead have them stay on the campus at Kishwaukee, and that helps to save some money with regard to transportation. But I wonder, is that really the best thing?
Well, what we're talking about are job skills. Okay, and so when you look at what kind of job skills one could find, let's say in the gift shop at Tisch College, would be similar to the job skills one would find at Schnucks, or the job skills you would find, I'm trying to think of at Oakcrest, or I think we have it at the county home, right, is one of our locations, would be similar to maybe the job skills that you might do in shadowing janitorial at Kish College. So we're looking at job skills in developing those job skills. Child care, janitorial, food service, also, working in a store. Those are all available and very closely available on Kish's campus.
Yeah, I can see the efficiency of that, but I'm not so sure I see the advantage that I think you would get of them being in the community at large with the interpersonal connections with all sorts of different people.
Okay,
depends how sheltered state
I understand what you're saying, and here's, I think, I understand where you're coming from. we are we are putting the situation in place where students can learn those job skills. Okay, we're providing that environment. Okay, and in this setting, perhaps we can provide one that isn't as, we're providing a more independent possibility, we're providing them with an opportunity where they can show their independence as an adult even further. I'm not discrediting what we're doing now. What we're doing now is wonderful too, but it's housed out of the high school. That's the
Well,
biggest
they end
concern.
this program at age 22, right? So,
Yep, right.
and
Day
is
before.
there's no follow-on after this, right?
Sure,
Or
there
is
is with
there?
adult services.
Okay.
But with
Okay.
adult services, they do not have the level of support that we are
Yeah.
providing.
So, I mean, they need their skill set, in my view, they need their skill set by the time they get done with this. Because they're going out into the
Yes.
real world then,
Yes.
right?
And
So
I'm looking back to one of my coordinators, Lisa Gorshals, is here tonight and has served in this capacity for a number of years.
So then when they go out into the adult force, they don't have the job coaching that they have now. So what ends up happening is that they don't continue those community jobs and they don't have any skills that are more independent work skills. So it's limiting. It's a great experience, but it's not sustainable at this point in time. So a combination is the best. The KISH along with some community work sites. So that's the best of both worlds. But for that end, they're usually either ending up on their parents' couches or at a sheltered workshop for which they have more skills than they should have, for being in a sheltered workshop.
Vicki, can I ask about funding?
Yeah.
So you listed a number of grant possibilities here, and since I don't know what your grant application deadlines or receipts are gonna be, I'm wondering if you really are anticipating being able to get all of this? And I guess if not, are you gonna come back and talk to us, or how are you planning?
It's contingent upon grant funding.
Okay.
It's contingent upon us getting this, getting the grant funding. Yes, Mary.
May I suggest that you also apply to the Roberts Family Foundation? That's April 15th, and it's the same grant as the Community Foundation.
I would thank you very much. That has been brought to my attention. I should have added that. And that I'm hopeful for all of those, but it does need to pass through the KEC board as well. And if it doesn't, then we'll be going back to the drawing board.
So do we want to make this approval contingent on the funding and KEC's approval?
I'm not completely comfortable, and that's one of the reasons, the funding and whether everyone else is committed, I think it's in principle a good idea.
Okay, may I tell you this though, to help calm your fears? We have enough students for DeKalb District 428 to handle this on our own. We honestly don't need all the other county folks to be on board. The reason we're putting it out there is to be a community service. And really, it could, what I've heard from the other directors in our county is that they can pinpoint a student or two from their district that might be very appropriate. For example, a student who is on the high end of the autism spectrum, okay, may have the academic skills to access Kish College, but needs the independent living skills and some of the social skills, some of the vocational skills that our program would provide. Perfect. They have parents that are coming to them that are saying, I'm not comfortable with the workshop setting. I want something different for my child. And they said that would be a program. They're very willing to work with me collaboratively on that. But really, Gary, we already have the student base to support this program ourselves.
Yeah, the parent issue is the other thing that even last time I mentioned. I would love to have some parents in the audience say, hey, we're for this or we're not for it, or their perspective, whatever it might be.
Sure.
You know,
They have the opportunity to come.
to come where?
They have the opportunity to
Oh,
come. This
yeah,
is public
exactly,
records.
and yeah. And
Yeah,
that's,
we can't reach out to them.
yeah.
Yes, what date do you think would be the funding? When do you think you could get
By May 15th.
by May 15th? Okay, so if we made this approval condition on 100% funding
Yep.
in place by May 15th, and we have KEC board approval, when will they vote?
So, we have a meeting tomorrow, which is not, any time you start to vote, so probably our next one should be.
Is that fair to you, Christie? Is
Oh,
that fair?
absolutely. I wouldn't expect anything different.
So many things upon.
May 15th, 100% funding from
Yep.
grants.
Yep.
Okay, and KEC approval.
Yes.
So that's my motion, so.
Thank you.
And why do we make it contingent on full funding, as you just said, versus just tabling it and voting on it once the full funding is
Because you
on?
need time to
go
fill
out
out the grant
fill out the
applications.
Okay, okay,
A lot of work, Gary.
okay.
Want your approval first.
So, roll call then, please.
Vicky Herman-Faber?
Yes.
Mary Hess?
Yes.
Mary Malott?
Yes.
Victoria Newport?
Yes.
Howard Feldman?
Yes.
And with that, the meeting will be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you, everybody.